Good morning, everybody. This is Brian Maxon from Journyx. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join us this morning for the webinar to talk about making time and expense tracking work within Dynamics NAV. The plan for this morning is to sort of walk through a little bit about Journyx and talk a little bit about some results that we got from a end user NAV survey that we did through MS Dynamics World, and then we can actually jump into the Journyx solution and talk about some of the topics that were covered from that survey. I think that there's a panel for everybody to enter in any questions that you might have, and so please feel free to enter those questions in the panel, and then we'll be happy to answer those questions towards the end of the webinar. So that with being said, I'll go ahead and jump into the actual presentation. A little bit about Journyx. We're actually based out of Austin, Texas. We've got about 1,200 or so customers, and tracking time and expenses is what we do here. We've been doing it for a little bit over 20 years now. We do offer both a hosted and on-premise solution of our Journyx software. Just to give you a feel for some of the different types of industries that use Journyx along with their dynamic solution, you can see we've got utility organizations, home healthcare, engineering, mostly project-oriented type customers. As I mentioned, we recently did a survey with NAV users through MS Dynamics World. And some of those results that we got from them around time and expenses really revealed some of the answers around why people need to track time and expense within their organization. So some of the feedback that we received is almost 80% of the respondents needed to be able to track time and expenses so that they could measure their cost on projects. Another 55% of those need to bill their customers. About half of them need to be able to pay their employees. And then a smaller percentage is needed to do things like resource management and also compliance. So as an example, like DCAA compliance for government contract work. In that same survey, we received a lot of feedback around some of the top challenges that people have when they're tracking their time and expenses. So number one, as you can imagine, is trying to get people to fill out their timesheets and do it in a timely fashion. The second one is really around correcting bad data that gets put into the system. So this is really more of your administrative types that have to do a lot of time and effort to fix bad data that's been entered into time and expense. The third one is that you're having to enter in time and expense data in multiple business systems. It would be NAV, or maybe it's the payroll system, maybe a project management system like a Microsoft project. There's not one easy way to enter it into one place. And then another thing is I can't track all of my data in one location. So I have to track, my project time in one place, my payroll time in a different place, maybe my expenses in a different location. So being able to enter in all types of data in one location was a key requirement. So how can a system like Journyx help solve some of these challenges that people responded back with? If we're talking about trying to get timesheets submitted on time, some of the things that really help solve that problem is giving you multiple options for data entry. You've got the web interface, but also mobile, so people can enter their time and expenses and even do their approvals through the mobile app. Having features available like email reminders to end users or late notifications to managers can really help make sure that time and expense sheets get filled in a timely fashion. And also providing administrators different reports and different views to make sure that they've got all the timesheets in on time before they go to push that data back out to NAV. The second one is probably the most time-consuming and what your administrators give the most effort in on a period-to-period basis, and that's fixing broken information. So first of all, the key to this is keeping the time entry process as simple as possible. Nobody really likes to track time, and so if it's not really simple, then it's not going to be as accurate as you need it to be. And you'll see a lot of this for people that try to track time in some of the native NAV solutions. There's a lot of clicks that an end user has to do to be able to track their time. Again, we want to make this as simple as possible. The second thing that can really help around that is having the concept of data entry validation rules. As an example, if you want to be able to require that somebody enter in a minimum or maximum number of hours in a day or a period to help cut down on some of the errors on data entry, then you really need a good way to be able to validate that on the entry of the data and not have to worry about doing that on the back end as an administrator. That same thing applies for overtime. So if you're tracking time for payroll and you want the system to be able to automatically calculate that overtime as opposed to having to do that manually, or maybe even worse, rely on the end user to pick which time is work time versus overtime. Having flexible approval workflows can really help facilitate the workflow process. So not only having multiple levels so that can be escalated through a workflow process, but also having the concept of a sheet-based approval process versus a project-based approval can really help make sure that the data is accurate before it gets into the accounting solution. And then just giving administrators and even end users the ability to make what we call prior period corrections, and having the ability to easily have that flow back into the accounting system is something that's pretty important. The third main issue that we got back from the respondents was that the timesheet system that they're using really doesn't integrate with some of the other critical business systems that we have. So not only integrating with NAV, but integrating with other types of business solutions like a Microsoft project, or maybe an outside third-party payroll system like an ADP or Paychex. Being able to integrate with CRM or maybe some of your HR tools. In any way, a solution like Journyx has a pretty robust web services API, or just a simple import and export capabilities that allow you to collect all of your data in one place and then feed that out to your other critical business solutions. Which leads into that last sort of bit of feedback that we received from the survey, and that's that typically when you're trying to enter in time and expense data into some of the native solutions, you have to enter different types of data in different locations. So there's not really one centralized location for entering in your project time, your payroll time, doing your time off requests, expense tracking, any sort of custom data tracking like equipment utilization or special pay, and then just even having the concept of being able to do resource management, resource planning, and then other things around compliance. I mentioned DCAA compliance previously. There's a lot of tools in a solution like Journyx that help you enforce some of those rules and policies around your compliance. And then one additional thing, if you've got people out there that are field-based workers, field staff, then a solution like Journyx offers you what we call sort of a crew-based entry, where you might have like a field administrator enter time on behalf of all of your different field workers. So that's sort of a little bit of feedback about Journyx and some of the challenges that that people expressed in the survey that we did through MS Dynamics World. So what I'd like to do now is sort of jump into the actual application and show you how we can help solve some of those problems. So Journyx in itself is a web-based application. I mentioned before we also have mobile apps for iOS and Android. And what I'll do is I'm going to log in as an end user first. And as I mentioned before, the root cause of a lot of the challenges that people have around time entry is about the user experience. So you have to keep this as simple as possible. Instead of having to click around a bunch of different locations like you have to do with some of the native NAV time entry options, Journyx provides you with a really simple, straightforward interface for basically picking your job, your type of work, your work type, whether it's chargeable or not. And I can simply just come in here and put in the number of hours that I worked against that particular item. Now, when I hit the Save button, this is going to give you an example of also another feature that we have within Journyx that helps validate your time entry. So you can see I've got a warning message that tells me I have to enter in at least 1 hour per day, or it's going to violate this rule that I've got built in. So this is a good example on a way to be able to cut down on some of the corrections or errors around time entry and keeping this as simple as possible. A solution like Journyx also allows you to create favorites or memorize your drop-down menu selections. And so when I go week to week, the time that I entered in against these different jobs and work types can carry forward to the next period, so I don't have to recreate my timesheet every time. I did mention that we have the ability to calculate and display time off balances within Journyx. We do also have the ability to create what we call leave request, which essentially allows you to request time off in advance. And that has its own workflow process with email notifications, a calendaring system, and things like that. Last note on the timesheet, as far as trying to get timesheets submitted on time, I mentioned that in Journyx we have the ability to create email notifications for reminders, late notifications to managers, things like that that can really help with the workflow process and making sure that timesheets get submitted in a timely fashion. So I'll go ahead and submit this timesheet for approval, and we can take a look at that on the back end as a manager or an administrator. One of the key elements from the pieces of feedback that we received from the survey was that there's not a way to enter in all of my data in one location. And so you can see from the timesheet, I can enter in my project time, my time off time, but I can also click this expense tab right next to the time tab to be able to enter in expenses. And you can see this looks identical to the timesheet process, again, keeping it very simple and straightforward. Same concept here is I can track my job, my expense codes, whether it's reimbursable or a company credit card, multiple currencies are supported. And really the only difference here is instead of entering in hours, you can just enter in your expenses. You can attach receipt images to these expense records either through the web interface or through the mobile app. We can also upload credit card files from your different banks or credit card companies, and then your employees can associate that against the appropriate projects. Again, just like the timesheet process, I can submit that expense sheet for approval, and it can also go through its own separate workflow process. Now, one thing that really sets Journyx apart from some of the other options is we also give you the ability to track what we call custom data. And really, it's just a third entry screen for the end user. But as an example, a oil field services organization may use this custom entry screen to track their equipment or materials used on a job. Anything that would help associate to the cost of a project or job. You could also use this to track things like special pay or bonuses, and then any of this information can be sent back over to NAV for project or job costing, paying employees, and things like that. All right, so at this point in time, I'm going to move away from the end user experience, and we're going to log in as an admin type person and take a look at things like approval workflows and reporting. So within Journyx, there is a multi-level approval workflow that's available. You can actually have up to 5 levels of approval within the solution. Within each different type of approval workflow process, we have both a sheet-based concept and also a project-based concept. So for example, a sheet-based concept might be that as a manager, I'm going to have my timesheet approved regardless of the projects that I worked on by one person. So on this particular screen, I can see the employee's name here, the time period, and the total hours that they worked. Now I could select all of these or individually and approve or reject them from this screen. I can also click on this period link, which will basically give me a snapshot of all the detail from the timesheet, and I can approve or reject it from this screen as well. Again, you can have up to 5 levels of approval, and then within each level, you can have both a primary and backup approver. So if somebody's out sick or on vacation, the timesheets or expense sheets don't get stuck in the workflow process. The expense sheets look identical to the timesheet approval process. Again, I can click on this period link to get a snapshot of the detail, and then I can approve or reject it from this screen. The project-based approvals or job-based approvals look a little bit different, and this is basically as a job or project manager, I would only see the time that has been worked on my particular job or project. So for example, if I worked on multiple projects throughout the period, when I submit my timesheet for approval, my manager may see my entire timesheet, but only the time I worked on job 1 may be seen by the manager that manages that job. And then the same concept applies. I can check these and approve or reject, this time at either the job or project-based level. The one other note I'll make around the approval workflow process, and it really again relates to making sure that timesheets get submitted on time and that they get approved on time so that you can feed that information back over to NAV, is around timesheet compliance. So within Journyx, we have some different views that you can use to make sure that all of your sheets are submitted on time. And so essentially what we can do here is we can look at, these are the 4 people that submit their timesheet to this manager. And from the legend, you can see here that Brian's timesheet is in a submitted state, but Austin, Candace, and Mike still have not submitted their timesheet for approval. And then we provide you with tools to be able to email the user and their manager. And really this is just a nice view for your administrators to be able to see whose timesheets do I have, whose don't I have, so that you can take the appropriate action before you need to be able to process that data and send it over to the accounting system. From a reporting standpoint, Journyx does have its own reporting engine built into it. You could choose to use other third-party reporting tools if you would like to, but it's all parameter driven. There are about 8 or so canned reporting templates in Journyx, but you do also have the ability to build an unlimited number of new reports through the reporting menu. As an example, if I wanted to build a very simple summary of the time that's worked, I can create my new report. And I can do anything from picking my date ranges to picking specific jobs or work types, employees. I can also pick and choose how this gets displayed on the screen. So for example, if I wanted to subtotal this data by job and then by person, then I can also come in here and I can control which columns appear in this report. So I can remove certain information. I can switch the order from left to right in which that information appears. And then I'll just come down here and simply save and run this report. And that will create a new report for me. And in this particular example, I'm choosing to subtotal this by job and then by person within that. So you can see all the reports in Journyx are pretty simple and straightforward. We have the ability to report on hours, on expenses, also on any sort of rate information, so billable rates, cost rates, to be able to do profitability type analysis reports in Journyx as well. Now the key to this information and collecting this data is to be able to feed that back into NAV so you can do your cost accounting, billing, and paying your employees from that solution. In addition to that, any of your jobs, items, work types, we would bring that information in from NAV that can control what people have access to on their timesheet and expense sheet. We would collect that data, send it through a workflow process, and then we can push that data back out into NAV so you can process the data for your different accounting functions. If for some reason you wanted to track and some time and expense data against something that's not in NAV, it's very simple to be able to add users, add jobs directly within the Journyx user interface. All right, so at a high level, what I wanted to be able to cover with you guys here today on this webinar is a little bit about Journyx as an organization, but more importantly, some of the feedback that we received from our MS Dynamics World Survey with the different end users of NAV, specifically around time and expense tracking. Again, 80% of those people need to be able to track time and expenses so they can measure their cost on jobs or projects, and then billing their customers, paying their employees, resource management, and also around compliance. Then I wanted to be able to come in here to the Journyx solution and show you guys how a system like Journyx can really provide value on top of what's available with some of the native time and expense tracking options within NAV. It really helps cut down on the time it takes to collect time and expense sheets. It really helps cut down on some of the administrative work by your accounting folks around fixing broken data. It really allows you to feed this data into some other critical business systems like a Microsoft project or maybe a third-party payroll system. And then just it all comes again back to the end user experience. So if I've got one simple user interface for entering in all of my different types of time, my expenses, and I don't have to jump around to a bunch of different pages to do that, it's going to really make sure that the data is more accurate, it's done in a timely fashion, so you can get all this information in real time from reporting and feed that into your accounting processes. So at this point, I'm going to look to see if there are any questions that you guys have submitted through the question panel. Some of the questions I see, the first one is, can time entry be used for billable and payroll data feeds? Yeah, I think we've talked about that a little bit, but essentially you can collect all of your time in one location and be able to feed that not only into NAV, so you can bill your customers and potentially pay your employees through NAV, but also forcing that data back out to another solution like an ADP or Paychex. Okay, looks like we've got another question. The second question says, similar related, can time entry be used for project costing in NAV, but support another payroll system separately? So I think I sort of just touched on that as well. But essentially, yes, you can collect all of your time in one place, both your project time and your payroll time, and then we can pass that time back into NAV, but also to, again, an external payroll solution like an ADP. Let me see, third question we have is, can approvals be conducted both based on who manages projects and who supervises employees? Yeah, that really gets back to our different types of approval workflow processes that are available within Journyx. One of those being sort of a sheet-based approval, and that would be more around the supervisor type approval. And we also have, again, that job or project-based approval concept. So you can use both types of approval workflow together or separately, but they are both available within a solution like Journyx. Then the last questions I see here is, can employee supporting data within NAV be used to set validations, payroll rules, or other existing timesheet processes? So I think that this question gets back to the ability to build different validation entry rules, overtime rules directly within the Journyx solution. So the quick answer on that is yes. We've got the ability to build these validation rules, overtime rules directly within the application. So all the employee has to worry about is entering in their time, and hopefully when we're able to validate that data on the entry process, cut down on a lot of the corrections that are required that probably your administrative staff is doing a lot of right now. All right. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left. Those are all the questions that I have in my question panel. I'll give you guys another minute or so to enter in any other questions that you might have, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. All right, it looks like those are probably all the questions that we have. So on that note, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us this morning. If you do have any other questions about Journyx, how we can help either you as an end customer or potentially as a partner collect time and expense data and feed that into NAV, we are happy to answer those questions for you. Other than that, thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.